I didn't plan to invite her. That's the part people don't understand when they hear the story later, when they shake their heads and say things like, "You must have known," or, "Come on, you don't accidentally invite someone like her." But I truly didn't plan it. The wedding invitation had been sitting on my kitchen counter for 3 weeks, slowly curling at the edges like it was tired of being ignored. My cousin Daniel was getting married, big venue, fancy lights, the kind of wedding where everyone brings a +1 and no one wants to be the odd one out. I kept telling myself I didn't care. I was 36, divorced, comfortable in my routines. But late one night, standing barefoot in my kitchen, staring at that invitation while the fridge hummed like it was judging me, I realized I did care. I didn't want to walk in alone. And for reasons I couldn't fully explain yet, even to myself, her name floated into my mind before anyone else's. Lena. The woman who worked 2 floors above me. The woman who laughed with her whole body. The woman who once brought me coffee when I looked exhausted and said, "You look like someone who forgets to be kind to himself." We weren't close friends. We weren't flirting, at least not in the obvious way. We were comfortable. Familiar. Safe. And that's what made it dangerous. I found her the next afternoon in the elevator, sunlight slanting through the glass walls, dust motes floating between us. We exchanged the usual small talk, weather, deadlines, the printer that never worked, and then, before I could overthink it, the words fell out of my mouth. I told her about the wedding. I told her I had a +1 spot. I told her I'd understand if she said no. She didn't answer right away. She tilted her head slightly, studying me, as if she were trying to read something written between my lines. Then she smiled, not wide, not teasing, just soft, and said, "Sure. That sounds fun." My chest tightened in a way I didn't expect. The days leading up to the wedding passed strangely fast after that. We didn't talk about it much, which somehow made it feel more significant. When we did exchange glances in the hallway or brief comments over coffee, there was a quiet awareness there, like we were both carrying the same secret. The night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake thinking about the last time I'd brought a date to a wedding, my ex-wife's cousin's wedding, years ago, when we were still pretending everything was fine. I wondered why inviting Lena felt heavier than that ever had. The morning of the wedding, I picked her up from her apartment. She stepped out wearing a deep blue dress that caught the light in ways that made my brain stutter. For a split second, I forgot how to speak. She laughed and said my name like she was amused by my silence, and I realized how rarely anyone said my name like that anymore. During the drive, the conversation flowed easily at first, music, traffic, how neither of us liked overly sweet cake, but then it softened, slowed. She told me she hadn't been to a wedding in years. I told her I usually avoided them. She asked why. I shrugged and said something vague about memories. She didn't push. That should have been my first clue that she saw more than she let on. The venue was beautiful in that polished, expensive way, white flowers everywhere, glass walls, warm light strung overhead like stars trying to imitate something better. The moment we walked in together, I felt it. The looks. The curious glances. The subtle double takes. Lena's hand brushed mine, then rested there, light but steady, like she was grounding both of us. People assume things. They always do. Someone joked about how long we'd been together. Someone else asked how we met. Lena answered smoothly, effortlessly, never correcting them, never lying either. Work, she said with a smile. And timing. I caught myself watching her instead of the ceremony, noticing the way her expression shifted, how she smiled politely at strangers, how her eyes softened during the vows, how she seemed both present and guarded at the same time. At the reception, after a few dances and one glass of champagne too many, the noise grew louder, the lights dimmer. We escaped to the terrace, where the music was muted and the night air cooled my skin. She leaned against the railing, looking out at the city below, her reflection faint in the glass. For a while, we didn't speak. Silence with her wasn't awkward, it felt intentional, like something we were both respecting. Then she exhaled slowly and said, almost casually, "Can I ask you something?" I nodded. She turned to face me fully then, her expression unreadable but serious in a way that made my stomach tighten. "My age doesn't bother you, does it?" The question landed heavier than she probably intended. For a moment, the sounds of the wedding faded completely. I realized then that I had never asked her age. I had noticed things, her confidence, the way she carried herself, the fact that she seemed to know exactly who she was, but I had never counted the years. I asked her how old she was. She answered honestly. There was no drama in her voice, no apology, just fact. And suddenly, everything clicked. The pauses. The restraint. The way she always seemed to measure moments before stepping into them. I didn't answer right away, not because I was bothered, but because I was realizing something about myself, that somewhere along the line, I had started caring less about numbers and more about how someone made the air feel when they entered a room. She misread my silence. I could see it in the slight tightening of her shoulders, the way her smile dimmed just a fraction. She added, softer now, "It's okay if it does." I just wanted to know before, she didn't finish the sentence. I didn't let her. I told her the truth, that what bothered me was how easily I felt understood around her, how unexpected that was, how rare. I told her I hadn't invited her because I needed a date. I'd invited her because I wanted her there. The night stretched between us, full of things neither of us was ready to name yet. When we returned inside, the wedding was in full celebration mode, laughter, clinking glasses, people dancing like tomorrow didn't exist. Lena slipped her arm through mine, not possessive, not hesitant, just present. And I knew, with a clarity that scared me, that this wedding wasn't just a moment, it was a turning point. If you're feeling this story already, if you've ever had a single question change the temperature of an entire night, stick with me. Make sure you subscribe, because what happens next isn't simple, and it definitely isn't safe, but it's real. And sometimes, real stories are the ones that stay with you long after the music stops. The drive home was quieter than the drive there, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that hums with unspoken thoughts, where every glance feels loaded and every breath feels intentional. Lena looked out the window most of the time, city lights sliding across her face, making her look younger and older all at once. I kept replaying her question in my head, "My age doesn't bother you, does it?" and realizing how brave it had been to ask it so plainly, without dressing it up or hiding behind humor. When we reached her apartment, she hesitated before unbuckling her seatbelt, fingers resting in her lap as if she were weighing something. She thanked me for the evening, her voice steady but softer than usual. I told her I'd had a good time. That felt like the most insufficient sentence in the language. She opened the door, then paused with one foot out, turning back to look at me. There was a question in her eyes, not the kind you ask with words. For a split second, I almost let her go. Old habits are powerful things. But then I thought about how empty my apartment had felt before I invited her, how full the air felt when she laughed, how rare it was to feel seen without being dissected. I asked if she wanted to come in for tea. She studied my face, searching for something, pressure, expectation, regret. Finding none, she nodded. Her apartment was warm and lived in, books stacked everywhere, small details that told stories without trying to impress. We sat at her kitchen table, mugs between us, steam curling upward like it was carrying our hesitation with it. She told me then, not dramatically, just honestly, about past relationships, how age had always been the quiet guest in the room, how it was fine until it wasn't, how men said they didn't care until they suddenly did. I listened without interrupting, realizing how rarely people actually did that for each other anymore. When she finished, she looked relieved, like she'd set something heavy down. I told her my truth in return, that my marriage hadn't ended because of age or attraction, but because we'd stopped choosing each other, stopped listening. That somewhere along the way, I'd started believing connection had an expiration date. Saying it out loud felt like tearing down a wall I didn't realize I'd been hiding behind. The weeks after the wedding were a strange, beautiful in-between. We didn't rush into labels. We didn't announce anything. We started with lunches that ran too long, walks that turned into dinners, conversations that drifted from light to serious without warning. There were moments of doubt, hers, mine, moments when she pulled back just enough to remind herself to be careful, moments when I'd wonder if I was being selfish, if I was stepping into something that would eventually hurt us both. But every time we tried to put distance between us, something gentle pulled us back together. One night, sitting on my couch, her feet tucked under her, she asked me what I was afraid of. I told her the truth, that I was afraid of choosing happiness and having it taken away, afraid of judgment, afraid of being the cautionary tale people whispered about. She smiled sadly and said, "People will whisper no matter what. The only difference is whether you're living or just explaining yourself." That sentence rewired something in me. The first time someone openly commented on our age difference, it happened at a family dinner. The room went quiet, forks pausing mid-air. I felt the old instinct rise, to deflect, to joke, to protect myself by shrinking. Before I could speak, Lena reached for my hand under the table. The gesture was small, but it grounded me. I looked around the table and said calmly that I was happy, that she made my life better, that I wasn't asking for permission. The conversation moved on. Later that night, alone, Lena admitted she'd been holding her breath the entire time. I told her I had too. We laughed then, the kind of laughter that comes from shared survival, from realizing you're braver together than apart. Months passed. Seasons changed. What started as a +1 invitation became something steady, intentional, real. There were disagreements, of course, about pace, about future plans, about how visible we wanted to be. But we fought fair. We listened. We chose each other over winning. One evening, sitting on the same terrace where she'd asked me that question months earlier, she teased me gently, asking if I remembered the moment she almost talked herself out of everything. I told her I remembered thinking that one question had changed the trajectory of my life. She looked at me for a long time, then asked if I ever regretted answering it honestly. I didn't hesitate. Because the truth was clear, the only thing I regretted was all the years I'd let fear pretend to be wisdom. When people ask me now how it started, I tell them about a wedding invitation and a simple question. I tell them about learning that love isn't about fitting into expectations, it's about finding someone who feels like home and choosing them anyway. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever let a single doubt hold you back from something real, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel and stay with us, because the stories that matter most are the ones that remind us it's never too late to choose differently, and sometimes, all it takes is the courage to ask the question out loud.